This is a book review of Christoph Wolff's biography on Johann Sebastian Bach. Johann Sebastian Bach is probably the greatest composer of all time. Certainly, in my view, he is the greatest. This book is a comprehensive, detailed, in-depth study of his life. Christoph Wolff is an expert on Johann Sebastian Bach, is, I think, or was a lecturer at Harvard University, but has gained knowledge about the life of Johann Sebastian Bach by studying not only his music, but letters, records. What can one learn from this book? Well, first of all, one can learn about his early life in Eisenach. He grew up in a family of musicians. His father was a musician. Many of his brothers, cousins, he had quite a large family as well, were all known to be organists, singers, violinists, music teachers, copyists, instruments makers. So he grew up in a very musical family. The context of Johann Sebastian's life is also very important because his training, his study, the music he became very well versed in, came from the Lutheran tradition. And to the Lutheran tradition, German Protestantism very much values music. Martin Luther himself was the writer of many hymns and placed very high importance on music during Lutheran worship, church worship. So one of the reasons why so many great composers are German is because of this tradition, which values music very highly. And Johann Sebastian Bach was born into this environment. So he receives his early training from his father and his older brother. He becomes a singer, he becomes a chorister, singer in the choir, and also he learns the violin and keyboards. Around the age of 10, both of his parents unfortunately die, so he has to live with an older brother. And eventually he goes to a school at the age of 15, but by this time he has become obsessed, extremely diligent, extremely industrious when it comes to practicing. One of the really inspiring things about Johann Sebastian Bach is the idea of nature and nurture. So one could argue, coming from a musical family, it was in his kind of DNA to be a musician. And he was born into a wealthy family who had access to instruments, who were literate, who had access to books. But also, Johann Sebastian Bach is someone who, throughout his entire life, worked incredibly hard on becoming a virtuoso, in becoming probably the greatest organist of all time. And this is due to the incredibly long hours that he puts in. But he goes to a school when he's around 15 years of age, and he becomes a master of the organ, and in particular counterpoints. Bach is known as the master of counterpoints. Counterpoints is a really interesting musical style of composition whereby it's very mathematical, it's very logical, but the idea is that one writes multiple melodies. You have a number of melodies or parts. So on the organ, this tends to be 3-part or 4-part counterpoints. You have a melody and you write a number of other melodies. But the real trick, the real genius lies in how the melodies combine to create, in this case, wonderful, pleasing, often dissonant harmony. Because what happened after Bach died in the Romantic era, music became verticalized. That is to say, composers after Bach looked at music in terms of just having one melody and chords underneath. So Chopin's piano music, for example, is a good case of this, where you have a beautiful lyrical, chromatic cantabile melody, and then a chord-based accompaniment underneath, broken chords, or some kind of left-hand piano. And the writers of orchestral music had the same mindset when it came to composition: one tune and accompaniment underneath. Whether or not that accompaniment is just for solo keyboards or it's being orchestrated, doesn't matter too much. The texture, the layering of compositions in the Romantic periods and during the Classical period was all about vertical melody and accompaniment. But the real genius, the incredible aspect of Bach's music is that he was very much someone who looked at music horizontally. So he would write a really interesting melodic line, and he would write maybe 4, so that even the bass line, most composers, even some great composers, the bass line really is just to support the chords. Often it's just the root of the chord. It's not really interesting in and of itself. But Bach, every part matters for Bach. Even the bass line sings, has a beautiful shape. And so the really wonderful thing about Bach is that it's highly mathematical, but it's also highly emotional. And he is the master of creating music, because one thing is to create one tune and then chords underneath. Another is to write 3 melodies being played simultaneously, overlapping, and organising them, constructing them in such a way as to create consonance, dissonance, tension, resolution. And to do this for 30 minutes, an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, takes a level of genius, as well as somebody really getting good at their craft, because it takes years and years and years and years and years to practice the principles of creating music in this way. And one of the reasons why I feel Bach isn't taught perhaps as he should be is because the music is very difficult to play. It's complex, but it's also beautiful. One of the strange things is that many people think, you know, music is only good if it's very difficult to play. It's only good if it's complex. But for Bach, complexity is not the goal. He often said that he wants well-ordered church music. In other words, the idea is to create harmonic perfection, is to create powerful sounding music. That led him to mastering and studying the inner mathematics, the principles of harmony. But the goal is not to do it for its own sake. Many composers, I would probably put Liszt in this category, and some of the 19th century pianists who seem to write music, you know, that's incredibly difficult to play, but not particularly enjoyable to listen to. But Bach, the magic of Bach is incredibly powerful sounding. It's really beautiful and profound and astounding and striking when you hear it being sung. And it contains the architecture, contains the principles and the mathematics, which serve the goal of creating powerful sounding music. So it's the service of the intellect in creating the music, which is designed mostly in the case of Bach in terms of Christian worship, because he was a devoutly religious person who, you know, whose task it was to write music that congregations could sing and listen to, being performed in churches. His final job, so around 1720 or thereafter, he moved to Leipzig. So before moving to Leipzig, he was the organist in a number of towns in the middle of Germany. He actually had quite a difficult personality and often fell out with you know, the people around him, so he often had to move because of disagreements. Quite political at this time as well, and he depended on support from, you know, the court and the princes and people in power. So he moved from place to place. So he was in Arnstadt, which is in the middle of Germany. He was the organist in Cotten, Mulhausen, Weimar, but eventually he moved to Leipzig, which at the time was seen as the cultural capital of Germany, had a wonderful university, and he became the cantor, so the director of music, at St. Thomas School in Leipzig, and he was responsible for a number of the main churches in the town, or the city as it were. It was a very large town at this point, 1720, and incredibly prolific composer. He wrote something like 1,000 pieces of music in his lifetime, and this is an incredible achievement when one considers he was a full-time teacher. So his job was to get the students up. So this school, St. Thomas School, was a boarding school, was an all-boys boarding school, and one of his jobs was to get them up at 6 a.m. In the morning, so they could have their Latin, maths. They also had religious lessons as well, because at this time people were highly religious. They had a number of classes to attend, and he had to teach them Latin as well. But his job was a full-time teacher, and he worked there until, you know, late in the evening. So he wrote a lot of these pieces. He wrote a cantata, which is a number of pieces, arias, for Mass, for service each Sunday. And he wrote one pretty much every week. These are large-scale works. It would take many hours to sit down and write a cantata every week. But every week, for almost 5 years, he continuously produced, ready for service on the Sunday. And the sheer amount of music that he wrote in his life is astounding, particularly when one considers the complexity of it, because all of this music is polyphonic, has multiple voices, multiple instruments. He was the master of the violin, cello, organ, voicing, singing. He knew all of these instruments intimately, and has written, he also wrote a number of kind of textbooks. One is called the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is a book containing 24 pieces, 24 studies to be learned on the piano, and this is designed to help improve technique on the keyboards, and is still used today. His exercises, his little pieces, are still used today to train and help students to develop the skills to play the more difficult fugues and two-part counterpoint pieces, which are a much higher level. But he was first and foremost a music teacher. He wrote textbooks. He taught students, so he taught privately as well. But his job was to direct the music in these churches, and he composed the music, he conducted the music, he played the organ, and so incredibly inspiring life, because I don't know of anyone who was as productive as Johann Sebastian Bach. When you look at the brilliance of his music and the volume that he produced, and then you consider the fact that he had like 22 children as well. He had 2 wives. All of this is well documented in this book. He contains lists of all of his children. He writes a chronology of his life, so a breakdown of the years and where he moved to, where he was at, what his profession was, what his job was at different points in his life. Contains maps of Germany as well, all of these towns, which if you're not familiar with Germany as a country, you're not going to necessarily be able to picture where exactly he was and where he went, so it's all a bit confusing. But there are maps. He also breaks down the currency of the time and looks at what one could buy with the currency that they were using, so one can understand, because Bach often complained when he went to Leipzig, he complained about the cost of living. He complained that although his salary was quite high, everything in Leipzig is very expensive. So he kind of, he became a bit, he wasn't very happy in Leipzig for a number of reasons. Also, there were some political things that were going on which he wasn't particularly happy with. But incredibly interesting life, and as far as I'm concerned, one of the greatest humans who ever lived. Incredibly productive. Thanks for watching.